So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and actually to another map that I have done before, albeit it was a very long time ago. And it's this rather labyrinthine one, which I'm not entirely sure of the name of, but it is also going to be a free-for-all, so this is going to be pretty violent, I would say, as far as a three-way battle goes. Now, three-way free-for-alls I've always been somewhat leery of in the past, because a lot of the time they tend to favour one player sticking out the fight for as much as they can and sticking the other two on one another, and then that player will of course inevitably end up winning because they'll simply have too much strength in the late game. But MSQ2, the player who sent me this battle replay, seems to think it was good in the way that he sent it to me, so hopefully that is going to be accurate, and we are going to be seeing a bit of a rumble between various members of the Elder races today, with Lothlorien, Dorwinion and Khazad-Dum facing off against one another. Just this type of map alone would tend to favour factions with the kind of infantry strength that Khazad-Dum have to offer, but we shall have to wait and see on that one. 33,000 frames is fairly long for a battle that only involves 3 players, but I would say there's going to be a fairly lengthy period of manoeuvring at the start, which of course we will cut out. But we shall start off, seeing as it is a free-for-all and there are no real attackers and defenders, with the player who sent me the battle replay, which is of course MSQ2, the only player to have any sort of human contingent in his army. The lumbermen, the armour piercing, will be useful against the dwarves, albeit the relative quality of this kind of unit is going to be significantly lower than the dwarves that they're going to try and at least engage in melee. They are very cheap, however. Dorwinion have access to the ability to field an army in the size that Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien perhaps don't, which in this kind of battle where grinding down the enemy through sheer attrition might be the way to go about things, but we'll have to wait and see. It's going to take a concerted effort from Dorwinion to be able to do that, especially in melee, if they're going to be relying on this kind of unit. They've got some Keldon River Patrol in here as well, with the purple colour scheme, as opposed to Dale, who have the same unit, but are dressed in a blue gambeson rather than the purple one we see here. Cheap javelins are always a good way to get really good value for money, provided you can get them up close and personal into melee. Lothlorien will be the kind of faction which can certainly shoot them from long range. Khazad-Dum can, but to a lesser extent, and these javelins are going to be more useful at whittling down those solid Khazad-Dum front lines anyway. But we'll see. Javelins, regardless of what you use them on, are going to do a lot of damage on whatever unit you're targeting, so they may prove to be more useful against the elves, we shall see. A unit of Elven Vanguard with a unit of Morroquendi pikes in and amongst them, so the classic combination of having a shielded unit of spears covering for a unit of pikes. This tends to be quite a slow way to do damage to opposing infantry, but also there's something quite inevitable about the outcome when you're on the right side of this kind of engagement, mainly because the shielded spears are going to be able to withstand any sort of ranged pressure, especially units like the Elven here, where their defensive attributes, especially with regards to their armour and their longevity with their increased stamina, it's kind of their whole thing. And then the pikes, of course, can keep enemy units that can deal damage to the spears at arm's length. So it's a very good symbiotic relationship. We see it time and time again with factions like Arthedain. Dorwinion can do it as well with this kind of setup. Plenty of cavalry, even in a more labyrinth-like map like this. You're still going to see cavalry and free-for-alls be used to pretty good effect. I would suggest the Morroquendi Glade Lords, as I've said in the past, one of the best units of all-round Lance Knights in the game. I would still give that title to Imladris' Gwythi Rockdor, but the Morroquendi Glade Lords not too far behind, maybe a little bit less in terms of the armour and their overall survivability, but they're much the same kind of unit in terms of what they offer for the faction. And in terms of overall cavalry power, they're probably the best unit that any one of these 3 factions at the very least can field. There's also the very aggressive Nandor Glade Riders. Now they can hide, I believe. They're also very good off the charge. Now, hidden Dorwinion cavalry is the sort of thing which both Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien are going to have to be on the lookout for in this battle, because most free-for-alls we see, especially those in this format, are won and lost based on what units you can sequester away and hide until the late game. Now, you're not going to be able to get away with hiding great big quantities of your army because people are immediately going to see what you're up to, but hiding away the right kind of unit for later on can be absolutely key. We saw very recently a Silmarillion battle replay where a few units of cavalry were able to rout and turn the tide of the battle right at the end. Units like the Nandor Glade Riders will certainly be able to do that if they are able to keep themselves hidden with their power off the charge. There's a few more units hidden over here as well, the rest of the Dorwinion army, and as you can see, it's pretty much an entirely hidden section of their army as well. Nandor Glade Guard, pretty much the footbound variant of the cavalry unit we were just talking about, very much all about that charge bonus and the damage they can deal. they are a little bit fragile, certainly in terms of their armour value, so they can be whittled down from afar by skirmishers, but also up close and personal there are plenty of units with better melee defence values than them, so you do need to be a little bit careful with how and when you decide to deploy them. And then a unit which can certainly hide anywhere, I think I had it wrong actually, I don't think the Lance Cavalry can hide anywhere, but the Morroquendi Stalkers most certainly can. Unit of multifaceted horse archers, poison projectiles and pretty decent damage with their bows, and they can do decently in a charging contest as well, especially later on, which is clearly when MSQ2 is intending to use these. So, I mean, I wouldn't be falling for it if I were the two red team players on this occasion. There's far too much of the Dorwinion army which can hide anywhere for them to just see this section of the army and buy that that's the entirety of the Dorwinion force. So I think maybe he's gone a little bit too heavy in for the hidden unit straight away, but we'll see. It depends on how he feigns weakness by revealing some of his units later on. Now then, BM.8, who's playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-Dum, he's got a cavalry contingent as well, which always pays off in a free-for-all like this, but of course Khazad-Dum's cavalry options are somewhat limited. What they gain in terms of their standard style of warfare in the canyons with their infantry, they're going to lose in terms of the ability to tangle with both of the elven cavalry divisions that Lothlorien and the Morroquendi of Dorwinion can field. The Merc cavalry may be melee cavalry, but they're going to find themselves outclassed by pretty much everything that Lothlorien and Dorwinion can throw at them in melee. They're going to be more useful, I think, as a defensive force, sort of a panic button to press if the Dwarven line is exposed to an enemy unit of cavalry. Then you can get the Mercs in the way, and that's pretty much what they're going to be used for, I think. You can't use them as an aggressive tool, I think, in the same way that the Elven factions may very well end up trying to do here. The rest of the Dwarven army is over here, and this is where I'd imagine the Dwarves are going to have spent a little bit more of their money. Starting off with the elite units, the 3 HP Mithril Guard are going to find themselves in a pretty happy place, given that this is exactly where they like to do their business. I agree with the decision to bring them over the Guards of Khazad-Dum. Guards of Khazad-Dum may have armour piercing, but that's not the most important factor when you consider going up against the high-tier Dorwinion elves and the Lothlorien elves. Yes, both of them have got access to armour, but you don't necessarily need armour piercing. I think the third hit point is more useful to keep your units alive. And you don't need the armour piercing against the Elvalin either, because the Khazad-Dum infantry is going to be superior to them anyway. The most that you're going to do with an extra unit of armour piercing bodyguard infantry is get rid of them more quickly, but I think longevity is the better call here for the Dwarves, and they would appear to agree. A couple of units of Sons of the Fallen will definitely find themselves well at home in these kinds of environments as well. Going to be fantastic for holding the line. Decent damage dealing potential for a high tier spear, but considering they're up against the elves, it is certainly going to be their defensive attributes which are going to be very, very important to them. More spears as well, designed for holding the line. 3 units of the 4th Legion Shield Guard without the armour upgrade, but they don't necessarily need it. I mean, as long as they keep their shields pointing in the right direction, they should be able to mitigate at least a decent portion of the elven arrow fire coming at them from both sides. Then over here we have some 2nd Legion Axe Guard, just a single unit of them, more of an aggressive unit again without the armour upgrade. Bit of armour piercing, won't go amiss, certainly against Lothlorien, who've got slightly more well-armoured elves than the Morroquendi do. But again, time and a place to use them. If you use them too early, then they're going to be focused down by arrow fire, and their lower melee defense in comparison to the other Dwarven units is going to hurt them. Then we have some 3rd Legion infantry, again without the armour upgrade. Interesting choices, but they are still an upper tier unit of line infantry, going for a more conventional approach here, Khazad-Dum, than the more hidden approach that Dorwinion went with, but that's certainly to be expected because the Dwarves very much enjoy fighting in this kind of environment. 3rd Legion infantry should be pretty good as a front line. Hammers of Gundabad, similar to the 2nd Legion Axe Guard that we saw, only they have locked morale, so they're going to continue fighting to the bitter end, which can be a very important tool to have in a free-for-all. Then we also have more 2nd Legion Axe Guard over there, and then 1 unit of Warriors of Khazad-Dum and 1 unit of Sentries of Khazad-Dum as well. Interesting to not see more of these Sentries actually, and interesting to not see the 1st Legion Pikes either, but they are a very expensive unit, and I don't know, I mean, plenty of basic infantry this. I mean, if it comes down to a pure slogfest, the Dwarves are going to win, I would suggest, just based on what they've decided to invest in. But the 2 Elven factions will be doing everything in their power, I'd assume, to not play right into the Dwarves' hands. We shall see if the Dwarves can outlast any Elven trickery that may be forthcoming. Finally, Wild Wolf playing as Lothlorien. The split shots of the Kindred of Celeborn. He's also got the armour upgrade on them to keep them a little bit safer. A couple of units of Lothlorien archers as well. So in terms of sheer long-range skirmishing potential, it's not too surprising to see what Lothlorien have invested in either. In fact, that's worth remarking upon. It seems like all 3 factions have invested in what they're best at, completely neglecting the other areas where, you know, they know another faction is going to be very strong. So Doesn't look like anyone has really gone for a really all-out and out grindy composition here, just based on a cursory glance at the kind of infantry units that Lorien have brought as well, because they know that the dwarves are going to have that in their back pocket. No one's gone in for a lot of foot archers because they know Lothlorien are going to be the best at that, and also in terms of hidden units and maybe a little bit more in terms of the cavalry, Dorwinion are certainly going to take that one home, but we'll see. Lorinand warriors, again, more of a flash-in-the-pan kind of unit, relatively speaking. They may be stronger than most other axemen, being elves, but they still have the same kind of weaknesses in the long run. But they're going to be very useful against the dwarves if it comes down to Lothlorien having to take a fight against them. Blades of the Wood are very basic, but they will still pad out your infantry force. A couple of units of Lorinand spears. I mean, to be fair, having a look at this, they've got a lot of their heavy units as well, so Lothlorien, maybe they are in a position to engage with Khazad-Dum. They'll need to whittle them down with arrow fire first, and then commit all of these infantry units, including swordmasters, axemen. You know, the Lorinand axemen obviously being a pretty good line infantry unit. They would maybe be better served waiting until they have an opportunity to go up against the Dorwinion units, because they'll be able to rip through them pretty nicely with the high base damage these axes have. But it just depends on what sort of restraint Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien have at committing all their infantry at one another, because that can only benefit Dorwinion in the end. Hopefully that isn't the case, because that would make this fight pretty one-dimensional. And finally, we have the General's Bodyguard, Lorinand Mountain Company. I thought this would actually be a unit of the Riders of the Golden Wood, but it's not. It's a unit of basic lancers. So, I mean, again, another unit of fast movers, but certainly the cavalry supremacy on this battlefield today would appear to belong to Dorwinion. Could be a couple of units of hidden Lothlorien units as well in particular. Maybe rangers could be hidden around here somewhere. Less likely with Khazad-Dum, they have less opportunities to hide anywhere, but it is what it is. But yeah, I will make a cut here because there's bound to be a pretty lengthy period of manoeuvring around unless that mercenary cavalry particularly wants to suicide charge into the Dorwinion army. So yeah, I'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. So it would appear that we're going to be starting with something of a fairly serious misplay here from Khazad-Dum, BM8, leaving his mercenary cavalry here rather than retreating him to the rest of his army. Now, I would assume that this is probably not going to be all that much other than a footnote in this battle. I mean, the mercenary cavalry is now running back to the relative safety of its army, perhaps, but yeah, they're routing. I was going to say, they actually hung on there in terms of morale for a lot longer than I would normally expect mercenary cavalry to do. Interestingly enough, when they do turn and fight, if it was singular units of Nandor Glade Riders they were going after, they probably would have done okay, given the fact that the Nandor Glade Riders do have their own particular fragilities. But that was certainly not the case, and that was a very bizarre set of choices that were made there by the Dwarven player with regards to his cavalry. Speaking of which though, MSQ2 might be about to make one of the same errors, because while he can post up in this canyon and try and stop any sort of Dwarven advance, there's no way he's going to stand any sort of hope at withstanding a Dwarven infantry push, especially not without the entirety of his army. I mean, you can try and whittle them down a little bit with Keldon River Patrol. Yes, there's armour piercing in the Lumberman. None of these units are going to be high quality enough, however, to be able to withstand the Dwarven infantry. Interestingly enough, mercenary cavalry, very cheap unit, the Keldon River Patrol, and seeing as they are primarily a ranged unit, that will certainly inform how good they are in melee. I mean, with how depleted the Merc cavalry are, it's actually, this is the kind of value that you wouldn't expect to get from mercenary cavalry at this point in time. Meanwhile, javelins raining in on the Sons of the Fallen, a single unit of 4th Legion Shield Guard moving forward. This is actually how these Dorwinion forces can get some good value. Surround them with the Lumberman, and the 4th Legion Shield Guard will take far more losses against this kind of unit than you would ever want them to as a Dwarven player. Glade Lords are still back there, Morroquendi Pikes, Vine Guard will help shore things up a little bit more. I mean, the other Dwarven Spears are moving forward now, and they are going to lurch forward, so the few extra losses they've taken is not too much of a problem. I mean, as we have a look back here, the real winners from all of this will of course be Lothlorien, because they are currently not getting involved directly in the fight. Having said that, as they scurry their way around, they are going to pass by this area over here. All of those units over there from Dorwinion are of course hidden. Lothlorien shouldn't know about their presence just yet, but I would imagine Lothlorien are going to think about going down this canyon over here, and then these units can be activated a little bit later. maybe the plan all along, maybe those units are just hidden so they can come in and clean up in the late game, and this army is more of a sacrificial one. Making a little bit more sense from that perspective, I suppose. Elvellyn Vanguard, and rather critically actually, the Morroquendi Pikes are also getting involved on the front line now. They will be able to help keep these dwarves at arm's length. And interestingly enough, with these javelin volleys they're taking, the dwarves are actually not winning this in the way they should be. But a big part of that is perhaps the fact that the dwarven army is also making its way around here, so a flanking move. I mean, there's not much Dorwinion can do to stop this, of course, other than maybe utilise their cavalry, seeing as most of the spears were used over here. But I mean, the dwarves do need to hurry up a little bit, otherwise this frontal assault that they're engaging in is going to fall apart. They might need to commit forward some reinforcements from some more 4th Legion, because I mean, I would assume here that the dwarven player is slightly newer just based on the way that he lost his cavalry. Morroquendi Glade Lords moving in, and this is where the Dorwinion Lancers can come into effect. The Elves also being caught rather out of position, the Loren-armed Axemen taking a full charge from the Glade Lords, and of course the Glade Riders themselves have also got a very effective charge. So this is where Lothlorien, despite not having been touched up to now, may end up falling apart fairly rapidly. These sorts of charges are the last thing that Lothlorien need. As an elven faction, you're going to lose great proportions of your army when you take charges such as this. I mean, you don't want, as Dorwinion, you don't want to reveal to Lothlorien that you've got units hidden over here. So you actually don't want to retreat your Glade Riders too far, otherwise you will reveal your secret. Right, now they have arrived finally, so this is surely going to be the end of this Dorwinion position now. Keldon Road Patrol getting into melee, but of course they will not be all that useful against heavy Dwarven infantry. 3rd Legion infantry are here. There's still a fair amount of Morroquendi Pikes, but that doesn't really matter so much when you're getting attacked in the rear. Another shower of javelins. I mean, the javelins have been fairly effective up to this point, at least as much as you can expect a unit of this cost to be. And the dwarves, based on how the armies have fallen, as I've said, they've taken more losses than maybe they should. So from that perspective, Dorwinion will probably be pretty happy. Andal Glade Guard have been revealed. Some of these units are still hiding, but yeah, I think this is actually probably the first example of us being able to point out a Dorwinion mistake. The fact that they've lured Lothlorien too close to their hidden units. I mean, just seeing 2 of them and seeing there's more space to be had, as Lothlorien, I'd be like, well, yeah, there's probably more over there. You need to be dealing with that at the first opportunity. And if Lothlorien do decide to come down with all of their might on this Dorwinion position, then there's not really much Dorwinion can do, and they will be the first ones eliminated. The most experienced player on the field, MSQ2, so perhaps it's not too surprising he's the one facing the greatest odds, but Galatharan Blade Masters taking hits. There's the Glade Riders. The Glade Guard are going to move forward, and they may as well at this point, but this is also going to draw the wrath of some Lothlorien skirmishers, which the Glade Riders will of course be pretty bad at dealing with. Loren-armed Swordmasters moving forward. Wow. Over here, warriors of Khazad-Dum, along with the Hams of Gundabad, the flanking force completing its work. Even the Morroquendi Pikes at this point are shaken, so this is going to be the end, and I mean, surely into the second part of this battle, when it begins, we'll be seeing Khazad-Dum face off against Lothlorien. Still the elite units for the dwarves back there as well to be taken into consideration. Is that 2 units that mean through a guard? No, it's just 1. They're just very thinly spread. Yeah, it's a very strong infantry unit to have late on just because of how tough it really is. And ultimately, while I think the dwarves could have executed on this better, it's not as if they've lost a huge amount of their army. They're still in good enough shape, certainly, to be feeling confident about things moving into the later game. That's going to be the end of the Dorwinion resistance over here. Now then. Dorwinion still trying to play tag with Lothlorien utilising their cavalry. I do not believe more of their units have been revealed over here. They have not. And a lot of their units have actually gone back into hiding, interestingly enough. The Glade Lords taking hits. I mean, surely Lothlorien are going to see them at some point. If they don't, and the dwarves actually come down here, Lothlorien and Khazad-Dum will be having their final battle basically in very, very close proximity to Dorwinion's ambush party. That would probably be the most interesting way this battle could develop. Those Nandor Gladeguard are actually taking hits from the lumbermen. Well, because the lumbermen are near them and Lothlorien is shooting at them. But the Glade Lords, as a result of being left unattended, are going to be hit by the Loran armed archers. Bit of a strange decision for Lothlorien to be using flaming shot against Elven Knights. Very unlikely to be able to rout them unless the battle is basically already won and you're just on clean-up duty. This unit of Nandor Gladeguard has revealed itself. Lothlorien are moving forward. I mean, again, Lothlorien, they're getting so close to this position over here that they have revealed a unit of Nandor Gladeguard. And once again, this unit of Blades of the Wood could reveal the rest of the... Yeah, they are. They're going to move in to attack these Nandor Gladeguard, which is going to ultimately reveal the Morag-Mundi Stalkers as well, and the secret is revealed. Now Dorwinion, if they want to have really much of a hope in this battle, what they need to be doing is engaging in some creative diplomacy with Lothlorien, saying, look, I'm already on my last legs, really. If you use all of these very nice quivers full of arrows on me, you won't have much to be able to whittle down Khazad-Dum's infantry, and Khazad-Dum's infantry is probably going to be sufficient to defeat yours, especially given the damage you've taken at the hands of my cavalry, so it is a bit of a strange situation, this, but they are having to utilise their Morag-Mundi Stalkers, and this is actually enough to convince Lothlorien to retreat, which is rather interesting. Poison arrows, I mean, you're not going to be doing as much damage against these kind of units as you would against certain others, but to be fair, with the heavier Lothlorien units, and certainly with the Khazad-Dum infantry, there's no really good choices of targets for archers on this particular battlefield. Glade Guard pushing further forwards. Meanwhile, still the scattered remnants of this cavalry over here. Still the sounds of battle as well. One Glade Master remains. A unit which actually is going to be pretty good against most of what the dwarves can offer, but not in the numbers that Dorwinion can bring them in comparison to the slew of heavy infantry that the dwarves will always bring in this kind of situation. And there he goes. It is interesting how Lothlorien have retreated from this situation against Dorwinion. Maybe they know themselves that they could beat Dorwinion, but if they do so, they'll take more losses. And ultimately, that would be bad news for them going into the late game against Khazad-Dum. You'd like to think that's the case. In come the Loran Mounted Company, not really the best of charges because they have to go through their own men to get at the Nandor Gladeguard. Defeat is almost a certainty. Most unfortunate for them. Actually, we may as well go up to ×2 speed here. Based on how this battle is developing, it's going to take Khazad-Dum a little while to get through here. This is currently the only battle happening, and it's kind of a footnote really. If Lothlorien truly wanted to, they could deal with these Nandor units, and actually in retreating they've probably taken not quite as many losses as they would from trying to kill off Dorwinion entirely, but they've taken a fair few anyway. This is still bad for Dorwinion as well in a way though, because they are still taking pretty heavy damage, and they still find themselves ultimately wedged in between Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien. Finishing off what very little remains of the Loran Armed Axemen over here. Just trying to make sure they can kill these off, although I don't think you really need to be this thorough. This unit isn't going to return from routing at this point, and yeah, with only 8 of them remaining, Loran Armed Mounted Company will probably fancy their chances in this battle actually. They do manage to to get out of there with only 2 losses, but still. Maybe losses that didn't need to occur. Lothlorien have returned from routing, which is something for Dorwinion, I suppose, and the rest of Dorwinion's enemy can, of course, return to hiding. I think I will make a bit of a cut here, because I think this is where probably the bulk of the frames in this battle come from the 3-way free-for-all. It's probably going to be a little bit of a period here where nothing much happens. So I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is getting back underway. Rather bizarre choice, I have to say, for Dorwinion to reveal their Morroquendi Stalkers in the face of the Dwarven advance. I would have thought that it would have been better to try and wait. I mean, Dorwinion have executed on their attempts to do damage to both factions pretty well here, but they've also been trying to fight both factions basically at once by themselves, which in a free-for-all is not really going to yield the kind of results that you want. I mean, Lumberman charging in. They're not going to rout the Dwarves either. Hammers of Gundabad are going to move in. They're an unrouting unit for a start, and I mean the Glade Guard can charge all they want, but the Hammers of Gundabad are the superior unit in an elongated fight, not least because of their armour, but you know, that routing, the ability not to rout is fairly key. Lumberman routing, and this is really one of Dorwinion's last rolls of the dice. I mean, they are going to do damage to the Dwarves, soften them up a little bit for the Elves, and they have done damage to both sides, but it may very well be at the cost of their chances of winning this battle. They may very well end up with having the most kills award when this fight's said and done, which is impressive in its own way, seeing as Dorwinion have to at least somewhat rely on human units and have a bigger army themselves, not something Lothlorien or Khazad-Dum often have to concern themselves with. Get pretty weak charges there from the Glade Lords. Continued pummeling here at the hands of the poison arrows, and you can see here Lothlorien very content to just wait it out. Biggest army that we can see, there's probably hidden units though. I mean, there's got to be some of the Lothlorien Blade Masters left, I'd assume, but I mean, if that's all they have left, then Dorwinion actually did do a real number on them with only a portion of their army. But then this is maybe the benefits of cavalry as well. The fact that if you don't have any defense against cavalry, they can absolutely ravage your army and leave you feeling rather spent before you've ever got to the opposition's infantry. You can see here that they are doing damage over time with these Morroquendi Stalkers, and they are actually shaken now, the 3rd Legion infantry. They're obviously only 21 of them remaining, so it's not too surprising, but as much as the Dwarves can absorb arrow fire, even when their shields are not pointing in the right direction, if you're under this sort of sustained arrow fire, you're still going to take losses. Although the Dwarves are in significantly better shape than Lothlorien by the looks of things. Maybe this pocket of Dwarven resistance will be overcome by Dorwinion. Continued rear charging. What's going on here then between the Hammers of Gundabad and, yeah, Hammers of Gundabad? As expected, they may have an armor-piercing focus, and the Glade Guard don't have much armor, but still as a unit the Hammers of Gundabad still too strong. Morroquendi Stalkers, Horse Archers, not the best at charging into opposition forces, but the mass alone is enough here to mop up heavy amounts of the Hammers. And obviously without any ammunition, this is all that the Horse Archers can be used for, but this may very well be enough to finish off this Dwarven resistance. It's been over here, and I have to say, both the Dwarves and Lothlorien have been pretty slapdash at facing Dorwinion so far in this fight. Dorwinion have played well, but they've been certainly helped by the manner in which Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien have gone after them. It's allowed Dorwinion to really punch above their weight, really, in terms of the units that they've been able to commit. Need to be careful now though, because the Dwarves are starting to wise up to this. Better late than never. They've got some spears, and seeing as Dorwinion's hopes in this fight now rest on cavalry, because they could still win with this cavalry, to be honest. that they're going to need to make sure that their cavalry is alive in the late game and that Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien are depleting one another. At this point, honestly, if I were Dorwinion, I'd cut my losses and run for the time being with my cav. Blade Guard are winning that particular fight. Because it is really only the two Morroquendi Stalker units that you have at your disposal. Meanwhile, this Blade Guard just charging in, getting a charge off, trying to do as much damage as they can before they inevitably fall. Meanwhile, are we actually going to start to see the first engagements in this battle between Lothlorien and Khazad-Dum? We are, as Lothlorien open up with their arrows onto Khazad-Dum as they advance. Once again, Khazad-Dum going to be hoping that their dwarven armour and shields can withstand this. Again, swinging wide like this when you're under arrow fire is another odd decision that we're seeing being made here in this fight. Yeah. Lothlorien moving backwards, trying to get into a slightly better defensive position, maybe just buy themselves a little bit more time to use their arrows. Again, fire arrows not really going to be worth your while at this point. It's really just the damage that they're dealing, which is going to be the important thing. It's also the split shots and the Kindred of Celeborn, of course. Always look very impressive. Meanwhile, Morroquendi Stalker's still charging in, maybe thinking that not quite enough damage has been done to the dwarves yet to try and prevent them from winning this battle, which is perhaps a sign that Dorwinion's decision to try and engage with the dwarves earlier on was maybe not the correct one. Still Mithril Guard loitering around here as well. This clutch of dwarven infantry is going to be fine. The dwarves running away and obviously showing their backs to the elves in this manner is going to result in more damage taken at the hands of those arrows. They're going to pull back. Is this going to be a case of someone isn't going to want to engage? Because I mean, if the dwarves take that tactic, the elves can continue to shoot at them. That would be very bad news for them, because they can't really afford to bleed manpower in that way. Keeping an eye on those Morroquendi Stalkers who have gone back into hiding. And we'll be hoping that come the late game, they can be the catalyst for victory. Dorwinion Mounted Company actually taking a bit of friendly fire there by the looks of the burning corpse in the distance. Once again, I think we can actually go up to times 6 speed. I'm not going to make a cut here because I don't know exactly when these armies are going to attack one another. Dorwinion Mounted Company thinking of charging in there, but in the end electing not to. It's quite rare that I utilise times 6 speed without making a cut, but I think that is the case here. The other dwarven units moving forward, I mean, they know that Morroquendi Stalkers are behind them, but I think the onus is probably on the dwarves here. I mean, the elves can force the issue a little bit by pushing their archers forward, unless they're out of ammunition, of course. But for once in this fight, Dorwinion are not the ones caught in between two armies. It's going to be the dwarves. They've got Dorwinion's cavalry behind them and the elven host in front of them, and also the elven cavalry. Dorwinion Mounted Company, as depleted as it may be, is something else that they're going to have to watch their flanks for. Yeah, very bizarre fight so far. I mean, certainly the best play has come from Dorwinion. They've maybe been a little bit overtly aggressive. But again, I mean, it will all be justified if those Stalkers can win them the game in the late game. But a big part of that is going to be that whoever they end up having to charge into and finishing off in much the same way as we saw not too long ago in that Silmarillion battle replay, the army they're charging into needs to be weak enough, both in terms of manpower and in terms of morale, for cavalry of that kind to be truly effective as we move on. That entire unit of warriors of Khazad-Dum getting squashed by the Dorwinion Mounted Company. Actually, you know what? I am going to make a cut because the dwarves are going to take a long time, and while this cavalry play is somewhat interesting, it's not going to be all that informative as to what the result's going to be. So I'm going to make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle's actually getting underway. Of course, as soon as I say I'm going to make a cut, I don't even know if I'm going to actually cut anything out there, because the Morroquendi Stalkers have revealed themselves as well, and so is this cavalry. 4th Legion Shield Guard getting nibbled at by them, and again, like, the dwarves find themselves in a bit of a difficult situation here, because they are now caught between cavalry and the cavalry isn't going to move forward unless it has a good opportunity to do so. So you can't focus on the cavalry in the way you might like. And also the elves are doing the right thing here by pushing their archers forward and basically forcing the issue for the dwarves somewhat. The dwarves are also making a little bit of an error here in sending forward individual units in this manner. Don't necessarily think this is the right thing to be doing. And they are shielded, they are going to take an awful lot of punishment from the front here, the Sons of the Fallen, without falling, but yeah. The bulk of the Elven army can now be committed forward and these dwarves can be swallowed whole. Another example, I think, of the Dwarven player being on the newer side. I think Wild Wolf over here has probably had a little bit more experience with the game, just based on the way that the armies and units have been moving. I think that this is certainly one of the first battles that the Khazad-Dum player has been involved with. The Dwarven units, I mean, yeah, they need to try and form up a bit of a Helm's Deep, really. Condense their infantry into a massive blob. Over here, try and beat the elves in terms of infantry, which you probably still will be able to do with stuff like the Mithril Guard and how tough your individual infantry units are. I mean, the Elven units are, of course, strong themselves, but I think the dwarves will probably regret, in the long run, committing forward little individual units to engagements against Dorwinion and Lothlorien across the field, because it's made them lose just that little bit more manpower than was ultimately necessary. And that is ultimately going to be very important, I think. Morroquendi Stalkers going to be able to get a decent little rear charge here. Oh, they pulled out of there actually. Bottled it. Elsewhere. Mithril Guard are arriving now, but I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to win. I mean, they're fully healthy, so they might be able to finish off the Lothlorien infantry all on their lonesome, but you know who that's going to benefit, and that is Dorwinion, who are going to charge into the rear here of the Dwarven lines, managing actually to flatten a good amount of their 2nd Legion Axe Guard. Unfortunately, they may actually be giving the momentum back to Lothlorien in many ways, because Lothlorien still have Lorenan spears and will be able to stop the Dorwinion cavalry dead in its tracks. At this point, MSQ2 doesn't want to undo all the good work he's done and just allow these two armies to wear one another down. Bide your time and wait. The elves have got their own cavalry after all, which can charge in and do a bit of damage, albeit Haldia has just fallen. Another charge, one unit of Morroquendi, actually both units of Morroquendi Stalkers are coming around to this side now. Morroquendi Stalkers charging in. What an insult. Enemies? What an astute observation. Yeah, it looks like the dwarves are going to come out on top of this infantry engagement. For all of the damage they took, they still had more left in the tank from an infantry perspective than the elves. I think it goes to show here, I mean, Morroquendi Stalkers can charge in all they want at this point, but I don't think they're going to have enough left to them to be able to face off against 4th Legion Shield Guard and Mithril Guard. So Lothlorien are gone. The only thing Dorwinion have left are these Stalkers, and even though they've probably played the worst on the field, the dwarves are going to win here, mainly because I think Dorwinion have informed this outcome just by the fact they tried to engage fully early against both armies, and in the end, despite playing the best compared to the army that's probably played the worst, that has proven to be a problem for them, and there's nothing Dorwinion can do. Dorwinion have to charge in. There's nothing else for it. They can try and force the dwarves to advance forward, but I mean, this is maybe a little bit of, what is this? Actually, Morroquendi pikes are the sort of thing which may turn this fight in Dorwinion's favour. If they can do enough damage to the Mithril Guard and prevent the dwarves having the mass to break the Morroquendi pikes formation, that's something I didn't actually consider, then Dorwinion should still go on to win this, but continuing to charge in. They're taking losses each charge they make, but they kind of need to do this. There's no alternative, and they can't really charge into the 4th Legion. I don't know. I mean, it's still very difficult, this, for Dorwinion. And as I said, if they had not tried to be clever against Lothlorien earlier on, this would have been a very different fight, because Lothlorien would have been in a better position to face off against the dwarves, and Dorwinion also wouldn't have taken losses earlier. They would have been able to move in earlier on as well. Morroquendi pikes. Is this going to be a rout for the dwarves? No. Doing good damage here though with these charges. With the Mithril Guard having their attention held by the pikes, you can see how difficult horse archers have it in terms of charging in compared to their Lancer and Knight brethren, but there's still enough here with their mass to be able to do the damage. There's not many of these guys left at this point though. And unfortunately I think even if they manage to charge the Mithril Guard into oblivion, there's still... It could go either way this, yeah. The players admits defeat. That's unfortunate because BM8 could still maybe have made something happen there. If he'd have burrowed his Mithril Guard into those Morroquendi pikes, they would have fallen pretty quickly. And I don't know. I think maybe MSQ2 is the deserving winner of this fight just because he played the best. I mean, under normal circumstances, trying to face off against all your foes at once in a free-for-all will end up with you losing the battle. But I think maybe having certainly one player, but I think both, slightly less experienced players helped MSQ2 a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit self-aggrandizing to have a replay like this shown, given that he obviously knows that he was the best player on the field and he was able to do a lot of damage to both. But ultimately it's still a pretty good indicator of what not to do with regards to your resources in a free-for-all in some ways, from everyone actually, including MSQ2. You've got to be very careful about revealing ambushes like that early, because under normal circumstances, 99 times out of 100, that would have gone badly for Dorwinion. But on this occasion, they just about managed to make it work. The elves and the dwarves, it's just a matter of experience, like just general play, in which they had their issues. Having a look at what did the damage, I mean, a lot of high kill counts here for Dorwinion. Morroquendi Stalkers doing well, Morroquendi Glade Lords, Cavalry of all stripes doing very nicely. Glade Masters as well, the Glade Guard when they revealed themselves. The force that initially engaged against the dwarves naturally isn't going to have done as well. The Morroquendi Pikes managing to escape, but 91 kills by the Keldon River Patrol isn't bad. And of course, in the end, it was fine margins, because if the dwarves just had slightly more left in the tank at the end, they probably would have been able to go on to win this, but in the end, they did not. So all of those little actions added up to this result. Unlikely though it may be. So yeah, big thank you to MSQ2 for sending this replay in. As if you couldn't tell, I'm not exactly feeling 100% today, so I apologise if that translated into the replay at all, but yeah, it is what it is. You've got to record on the weekends, otherwise I'll fall behind and then there'll be massive gaps in my schedule, which YouTube will punish me mercilessly for, so we have to make do and mend, I suppose. But yes, nice to see a free-for-all, nice to see this map as well. I think the last time I saw this map, actually I was playing on it, and it was about 2 years ago, so there's been certainly a big gap since we saw it. Regardless, as we move forward, there's some classic maps that are going to be coming up in the next month or so. Bersergath is going to be making its return. Tolfalas probably going to be making a return as well. Other stuff, top 5 Spear Infantry for Rise of Mordor, which keeps getting pushed back, but I will get to it at some point soon. And yeah, that's really all there is to be said. So big thank you to MSQ2 once again. Big thank you to the players involved in this one. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.